If that bridge belonged to the HOA, why was my family's name still on the deed beneath their feet? That was the first thing I thought at 7:14 on a cold Tuesday morning when the sound of an impact driver started hammering through the valley below my house. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when the metallic rattle hit again. Rat-tat-tat. Then silence. Then another burst. I stepped onto the porch and smelled wet cedar, creek water, and diesel exhaust drifting uphill through the trees. Down by Morrow Creek, two men in orange work vests were drilling a polished aluminum sign into the railing of my bridge. Fox Hollow HOA, resident access only. My coffee nearly slipped out of my hand. I had grown up crossing that bridge. My father had replaced half those boards himself. I still knew which plank squeaked near the east rail and where he had driven an old square nail into the timber because he refused to throw away anything that still had 10 years of life left in it. And now somebody was branding it like a community swimming pool. I pulled on my boots and headed downhill. Gravel snapped beneath my soles. The closer I got, the louder the diesel became. A white tow truck sat crooked near the entrance with its amber lights flashing, and my pickup was already hooked by the front tires. Standing beside it was Denise Harwood, president of the Fox Hollow HOA, cream-colored jacket zipped to the throat, clipboard tucked against one arm like she was serving court papers. Behind her waited a concrete truck, its drum turning slowly with that deep hollow churn you feel in your ribs. I stopped 10 feet away. Why is my truck being towed? Denise barely looked up. Because you parked it on association property. I stared at her, then at the bridge, then back at her. Association property? She finally smiled. It was the kind of smile that comes from someone who thinks the argument ended before you arrived. This bridge belongs to Fox Hollow, Russell. It has for years. One of the workers paused with the drill still pressed against the railing. The creek moved beneath us, brown from 2 days of rain, brushing the stone abutments with a steady hiss. I could hear the bridge groan softly as the concrete truck rolled forward another few inches. That sound bothered me more than Denise did. My father used to stop right where I was standing, tap the railing twice, and say the same strange thing every spring. 12 feet, Russ. That's the promise. I had always assumed he meant the width of the bridge. That morning, for the first time, I wondered if he had been talking about something else. Denise pointed toward the tow driver. If you cooperate, we can avoid making this difficult. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because 3 generations of my family had maintained that crossing, and somehow I was the one being warned not to make things difficult. What would you do if an HOA suddenly claimed a bridge your family had treated as private property for decades? I walked to the new sign and ran my fingers over one of the fresh screw heads. Bright metal dust clung to my skin. Who authorized this? I asked. Denise tapped the clipboard. The board did. And who authorized the concrete truck? Her eyes shifted for half a second toward the road behind her. That was when I noticed something I had never seen at Fox Hollow before. Survey stakes. Fresh orange flags. More than a dozen of them disappearing through the trees on the far side of the creek. Denise recovered quickly. Community improvements. I looked past her at the stakes, then at the truck, then at the sign bearing the HOA's name. Something about the scene was too organized to be a simple maintenance project. Denise thought I was angry about a sign. She thought this was going to be another homeowner argument about access, rules, and who had the bigger stack of paperwork. She had no idea there was an old metal document box in my barn, still smelling faintly of machine oil and cedar, with my father's handwriting across the lid. And she definitely had no idea what one recorded deed inside that box was going to do to every claim she was making that morning. If you enjoy stories where patience, paper trails, and property rights matter more than shouting, please subscribe to support the channel and stay with me to the end, because the bridge was only the beginning. My father never talked about ownership the way people at Fox Hollow did. He never called the bridge an asset, never called it infrastructure. To him, it was simply something you maintained because people depended on it. Walter Avery had hands that always smelled faintly of pine tar, machine grease, and black coffee, and every spring he walked the length of that bridge with a carpenter's hammer tucked through his belt. I was 12 the first time he let me replace a plank. The creek was running high from snowmelt, cold water flashing between the boards while I struggled with a wrench that felt too heavy for my hands. He watched me fight the rusted bolt for almost 5 minutes before saying, "Do not force it. Find out what is holding it first." That was how my father approached almost everything. Machinery, people, problems. He believed most damage came from men who pushed before they understood what they were pushing against. Years later, I ended up working the same way. I owned a small stringed instrument repair shop outside Hendersonville, where I spent my days resetting guitar necks, repairing cracked mandolins, and coaxing old violins back into tune. There was nothing glamorous about it. Most mornings smelled like spruce dust, hide glue, and fresh coffee. My hands were usually covered in wood shavings instead of paperwork. Precision mattered more than speed. One careless turn of a tool could ruin an instrument older than I was. The property by Morrow Creek had been in our family long before Fox Hollow existed. My grandfather bought the acreage when the hills beyond the creek were mostly timber and pasture. The first version of the bridge was crude, just heavy timber beams and rough decking wide enough for a farm truck. When developers eventually divided the land beyond us into residential lots, my family allowed people to cross. Dad never treated neighbors like trespassers. He waved at school buses, helped push stalled cars during winter freezes, replaced loose boards before anyone had to ask. Every year he repeated the same phrase while measuring along the eastern approach. 12 feet, Russ. That is the promise. I thought it was one of those strange rules old men carried around in their heads. The bridge itself was wider than 12 feet in places, so the number never made much sense to me. After Dad died, I kept his spring routine anyway. Check the bolts. Clear branches from the abutments. Replace warped lumber. Listen for changes in the way the bridge sounded underweight. There was one square-headed nail near the south railing that he had driven in decades earlier. He used to tap it twice whenever we finished working. I still did the same thing without thinking. Fox Hollow changed slowly at first. New mailboxes. Fresh landscaping. Bigger houses replacing smaller ones. Then the homeowners association became more aggressive about appearances. Denise Harwood arrived 3 years earlier and somehow made every ordinary neighborhood issue sound like a corporate emergency. She spoke about standards, liability, and community assets with the confidence of someone who assumed official vocabulary created official authority. I had mostly ignored her. I was not a member of Fox Hollow. My house sat outside its recorded boundary on the near side of the creek. Still, residents crossed the bridge every day, and nobody had ever caused trouble. That was why Denise's new sign bothered me in a way I could not immediately explain. It was not just the words. It was the assumption behind them. By noon that Tuesday, I was back in my shop trying to concentrate on a 1940s Martin guitar when the memory of Dad's voice interrupted me again. 12 feet. I set down my chisel. For the first time in 34 years, I stopped hearing the phrase as a measurement. I heard it as a legal promise. And suddenly I knew exactly which box in the barn I needed to open. The metal box was exactly where I remembered it, pushed behind 2 paint cans on the top shelf of the barn cabinet, coated in a skin of dust thick enough to hold a fingerprint. The latch stuck when I pulled it. I had to work it loose with the edge of an old putty knife, and when it finally opened, the smell hit me first. Dry paper, cedar, machine oil, and that faint musty odor every family archive seems to collect after enough decades. Inside were tax receipts, survey copies, handwritten repair notes, photographs of the bridge before Fox Hollow had a name, and one folded plat with my father's block handwriting across the corner. I spread everything across the workbench under a buzzing fluorescent light. At first, nothing looked dramatic. Lines, parcel numbers, bearings, measurements. The kind of paperwork most people glance at once and never want to see again. Then I found the phrase, 12 feet. It appeared in a typed description beside a narrow strip crossing the approach to Morrow Creek. I read the paragraph twice, but the wording was dense enough that I did not trust my own interpretation. Dad had clearly understood it. I did not. So instead of marching back to Denise with a dusty photocopy and a theory, I did what I do when an instrument comes into my shop with a crack I cannot immediately diagnose. I slowed down. The next morning, I drove to the County Register of Deeds office. The building smelled like carpet cleaner and printer toner. I gave the clerk the names from the old document and waited while she searched the recorded index. 20 minutes later, she slid several copies across the counter. One showed my grandfather's parcel. Another showed the later subdivision tracked beyond the creek. The third was the one that made the hair rise on my arms. The bridge approach was not colored as common association property. A narrow access strip crossed it, but the underlying parcel stayed with the Avery tract. I still did not celebrate. Maps can confuse people. Old descriptions can overlap. I needed someone who understood chains of title better than I understood spruce tops and bridge pins. That afternoon, I called a real estate attorney named Claire Benton in Asheville. I told her the facts without adding drama. Private parcel. Longtime neighborhood use. New association sign. Heavy construction traffic. Claimed ownership. She was quiet for several seconds. Then she asked one question. Did the association show you a deed? Or only a plat? Only a plat. Another pause. Do not block anyone yet. Do not remove anything yet. Send me every recorded instrument you have. That sentence told me more than any speech could have. By Friday, Denise had escalated anyway. A glossy letter arrived by certified mail accusing me of interfering with association-controlled common infrastructure. It warned that unauthorized obstruction could trigger fines, attorney fees, and emergency enforcement. The paper was thick, expensive, and carried a blue embossed Fox Hollow seal at the top. I read it standing at my kitchen counter while rain tapped against the window. Then my phone buzzed. It was a neighbor named Helen Price. She had lived across the creek for almost 20 years. Russell, are you trying to stop residents from using the bridge? I looked at the letter again. No. Denise said you were threatening to close it. There it was. Not just paperwork. Narrative. She was turning a title dispute into a community panic before anyone had verified what she actually owned. I told Helen the truth. Existing residents could keep crossing. I was not trying to strand anybody. I only wanted the records checked before the association expanded access or claimed control it might not have. Helen exhaled softly. That is not what we were told. After we hung up, I drove down to the bridge. New reflective markers had appeared along the rails. A small camera was mounted on a post near the east entrance. And tied to a tree beyond the creek were 3 fresh orange survey ribbons I had not seen before. They did not follow the residential road. They ran deeper into the woods, toward a tract that had been empty for years. I stood there listening to the creek move under the decking and realized Denise was not preparing to manage the bridge. She was preparing to use it for something bigger. The survey ribbons led me almost 300 yards beyond the bridge before they disappeared into a stand of poplar trees. I followed them on foot Saturday morning, boots sinking into wet leaves, the air sharp with pine and cold creek mist. Every 50 feet or so, another orange flag marked a path through land that had never been part of Fox Hollow's residential road. At the end of that path, I found a freshly staked clearing and a temporary project sign wired to 2 posts. Blue Ember Cabins. 24 mountain retreats. I stood there long enough to hear a woodpecker hammering somewhere uphill. Suddenly, the concrete truck from Tuesday made sense. So did the survey crew. So did Denise's sudden interest in cameras, access stickers, and calling my bridge association infrastructure. She was not protecting an old neighborhood crossing. She was preparing it for construction traffic. I photographed the sign and every visible stake, then drove home and searched county planning records. Blue Ember had submitted preliminary documents for a cabin development on a wooded tract behind Fox Hollow. Their public access route from the state road ran nearly 9 miles around the ridge. It crossed steep terrain and required upgrades before regular construction traffic could use it. The route through Fox Hollow was barely a mile, and it crossed one thing they did not control. My phone rang before I finished reading. Claire Benton. Her voice was calm, but tighter than before. I found something you need to see. She emailed me a copy of a Fox Hollow board agenda filed with its meeting packet. Halfway down the second page was a line called Temporary Construction Access Agreement. Proposed consideration, $138,000. The description underneath referred to association-controlled bridge access serving the eastern corridor. I read that phrase 3 times. Can they do that? I asked. That depends on what rights they actually have, Claire said. And that is exactly why we do not guess. She had ordered certified copies of the relevant instruments and wanted a surveyor to compare the legal descriptions on the ground. Until then, she told me to keep allowing ordinary residential passage and to document any attempt to expand the use. That same afternoon, Denise called me directly. Her voice came through my truck speakers smooth and cheerful, like Tuesday had never happened. Russell, I heard you have been wandering around private development property. I was following survey markers that start beside my bridge. Silence for half a beat. The association is coordinating future infrastructure improvements. For Fox Hollow. I asked. For community benefit. There it was again. Language polished until it stopped meaning anything. I asked whether the board had signed an access deal with Blue Ember. Her tone changed immediately. Board negotiations are confidential. Then why are construction vehicles already staging at the bridge? Because we have authority over the crossing. I pulled into my driveway and shut off the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab made her next words sound even sharper. Russell, you are making this harder than it needs to be. People have used that bridge for decades. Your family cannot suddenly pretend it belongs only to you. I looked through the windshield toward Morrow Creek. I never said people could not use it. You are obstructing association rights. Show me what those rights are. She exhaled, annoyed. We have the plat. I almost answered, but Claire's warning came back to me. Do not argue the entire case before the records are complete. So I said only. Then send me the recorded document that gives the association ownership. Denise went quiet. Then she said, you will hear from our attorney. The line went dead. Monday morning, another certified envelope arrived. This one was thicker. It accused me of interfering with planned improvements and warned that the board could seek reimbursement for delays. Attached was a map showing a bold blue line across the creek labeled Community Access Corridor. No deed. No transfer. Just another map. But one detail stopped me cold. Beyond Fox Hollow, the blue line continued directly into the Blue Ember Tract. Denise was not merely claiming the right to manage existing neighborhood access. She was trying to extend that access to land that had never depended on the bridge before. I set the map beside my father's old paperwork and stared at the 12-foot notation again. For the first time, I realized the number might not just define where people could cross. It might define exactly who could cross and for what purpose. By Tuesday evening, the story Denise had been telling the neighborhood had grown teeth. 3 residents emailed me asking whether I planned to install a gate. Someone left a handwritten note under my windshield wiper that said, please do not cut US OFF. I stood in the parking lot outside my shop holding that note while cold rain ticked against the truck roof. That was the moment I understood what Denise was doing. If she could make everyone afraid of me, then any move I made to protect the bridge would look selfish. So I did the opposite of what she expected. I wrote a short letter to every Fox Hollow homeowner I could identify through public records. No accusations. No legal threats. Just 4 sentences. Existing residential access would continue. I was not closing the bridge. I was disputing the association's claim of ownership and any attempt to expand access beyond whatever rights were actually recorded. Until the title work was complete, I asked everyone to keep using the crossing exactly as they always had. I mailed the letters the next morning. By lunch, Denise called. You had no authority to contact our members. I leaned over a violin bridge under my work lamp, shaving a fraction of an inch from the maple with a sharp plane. They are my neighbors. You are creating confusion. I am clearing it up. Her voice hardened. You are undermining the board. I stopped working and listened to the faint hum of the shop furnace. Then show them the deed. She hung up. That afternoon, Helen Price came by carrying a paper bag that smelled like cinnamon bread. She set it on my counter and looked embarrassed. I owe you an apology. For what? I believed her. She told me Denise had held an emergency neighborhood meeting Sunday night. According to Denise, I was an outside property owner trying to use an ancient technicality to gain leverage over Fox Hollow. She said the bridge had become community property through decades of maintenance and use. I asked Helen who had paid for that maintenance. She frowned. The association, I thought. I opened a drawer beneath my register and pulled out copies of lumber receipts from the past 8 years. Bolts, deck boards, preservative, structural screws. Every receipt carried my name. Helen ran one finger down the dates. She told us the dues paid for this. That was new. I did not react, but something inside the dispute shifted. If residents believed HOA dues maintained the bridge, I needed to know whether Denise had merely exaggerated or whether the association had actually been charging for work it did not perform. I called Claire. She told me not to chase every possible problem at once. Ownership first. Scope of easement second. Everything else comes after. It was exactly the kind of answer my father would have respected. Find out what is holding it before you force it. The surveyor arrived Thursday morning. His name was Martin Cole, a quiet man in his 60s who wore mud-stained boots and carried equipment that looked more expensive than my entire workshop. We walked the creek line while he compared monuments, bearings, and old calls from the recorded descriptions. The wind rattled bare branches above us. At one point, he stopped near the eastern approach and pushed aside wet leaves with his boot. Beneath them was a capped iron pin almost flush with the soil. He checked his receiver, then looked at me. This matters. The pin lined up with the old Avery boundary. The 12-foot easement crossed the parcel, but the parcel itself had never moved. That afternoon, Claire called again. Her title search was nearly complete. She had found no recorded conveyance transferring the bridge parcel to Fox Hollow or to the association. But she had also found something more important than ownership. The easement language did not grant unlimited public passage. It identified specific benefited parcels from the original subdivision and described ingress and egress tied to those properties. Blue Ember was not among them. I sat very still behind my workbench. So they cannot just add a new development? Not based on what I have seen, Claire said. But do not touch the sign, do not block residents, and do not confront the developer. We document first. Then she added, Russell, there is one more thing. I want the final Blue Ember agreement before Denise realizes why. That sentence changed the whole strategy. We were no longer trying to stop Denise from making a mistake. We were waiting to see whether she would put that mistake in writing. The final Blue Ember agreement arrived without Denise sending it to me. Helen found it buried inside the digital board packet for a special meeting scheduled the following Monday night. She forwarded the file before breakfast. I opened it at my kitchen table while the coffee maker hissed behind me and rain tapped against the glass. The first page looked ordinary enough. Temporary access, construction coordination, insurance requirements. Then I reached the representation section. One sentence stopped me cold. Fox Hollow Homeowners Association represented that it possessed full ownership and authority to license use of the bridge and adjoining access corridor. I read it again. Full ownership, not maintenance authority, not shared access. Ownership. Denise had finally done exactly what Claire wanted. She had put the claim in writing. I called her before the shop opened. Claire answered on the second ring. Do not forward that agreement to anyone else yet, she said. Save the original file. Save the email. Preserve the metadata if you can. I am requesting the official packet directly. Her voice stayed measured, but I could hear the change in it. We had crossed from neighborhood argument into documented representation. By noon, Martin Cole sent his preliminary survey overlay. I printed it on oversized paper and spread it across my workbench beside the certified deed. The smell of spruce dust mixed with warm printer toner. One line marked the Avery parcel. Another traced the 12-foot easement. The difference was so clear even I could see it without help. The easement crossed my land, but it did not swallow it. More importantly, the listed benefited parcels ended inside the original Fox Hollow subdivision. The Blue Ember tract sat beyond them like a stranger trying to use someone else's key. Claire called again that afternoon. The language is stronger than I expected. She explained it carefully. The recorded easement granted ingress and egress for specific parcels created when the subdivision was formed. Nothing in the documents she had reviewed transferred fee ownership of the bridge parcel to the association. Nothing expressly extended the easement to future outside development. Blue Ember could potentially seek another legal route or negotiate directly with the owner, but Fox Hollow could not simply create broader rights because a board vote said so. I leaned back in my chair and stared at Dad's old note. 12 feet, Russ. That is the promise. Suddenly, it was not mysterious anymore. My father had not been teaching me how wide the bridge was. He had been reminding me how far our obligation went. Honor the recorded access. No more. No less. That evening, I drove down to the creek with a flashlight. The water was high and dark beneath the decking. I found the old square-headed nail near the south railing and tapped it twice with my knuckle. For the first time since Dad died, I felt like he had left me instructions instead of memories. The next morning, Denise sent another letter. This one demanded that I cease interference with association common property and threatened a $2,500 assessment for delays affecting scheduled improvements. I took the envelope to the shop and laid it beside the Blue Ember agreement. One document claimed ownership. The other punished me for questioning it. I smiled because Denise had just connected both problems with her own signature. Claire advised one response only. A formal notice disputing title and objecting to any expansion of bridge use pending resolution. No accusations. No threats. No dramatic language. We sent it certified. Denise replied within hours. The board has reviewed your position and finds it without merit. That sentence told me she was not backing down. By Friday, Blue Ember had moved portable barriers and equipment to the far end of the crossing, ready for staging. Residents still drove through normally. I made sure they could. I touched nothing. I blocked no one. I simply photographed every change and logged the time. Then Martin called with his final survey. Russell, the bridge approach, the supporting parcel, and the easement alignment all matched the old records. I asked him if he was certain. He gave a quiet laugh. That is why you hired me. An hour later, Claire sent me one final message. She had requested the hearing. Denise would have to explain, on the record, exactly what document she believed gave Fox Hollow ownership. I looked at the certified deed sitting beside my father's handwritten notes and realized the next move no longer belonged to me. It belonged to the paper. The hearing was set for 9:30 Monday morning in a county conference room that looked nothing like the courtroom Denise had probably imagined. No dramatic wood paneling. No raised bench. Just gray carpet, fluorescent lights, a long table, and a wall-mounted screen that hummed softly when the clerk turned it on. I arrived early with Claire Benton carrying one slim binder and a folder of certified records. Denise arrived 10 minutes later with 2 board members, the association attorney, and enough printed exhibits to fill a banker's box. She looked completely comfortable. That was what made it interesting. People who know they are lying usually look nervous. Denise looked offended that anyone had made her explain herself. The first 20 minutes were exactly what I expected. She talked about community reliance, maintenance history, decades of uninterrupted use, safety obligations, and the board's responsibility to protect shared infrastructure. Her attorney displayed the subdivision plat on the screen, enlarged until the blue access line looked like the most important object in North Carolina. Denise pointed at it with a pen. That corridor has served Fox Hollow since development began. The association has always treated the bridge as common property. Claire leaned toward me and whispered, "Listen to the verbs. Treated, used, maintained, not acquired." When it was Claire's turn, she did not attack Denise. She did not accuse anyone of fraud. She simply asked questions. "Ms. Harwood, do you agree the association entered an agreement with Blue Ember Cabins?" Denise nodded. "Yes." "And in that agreement, the association represented that it possessed full ownership and authority to license the bridge." "Correct." "What recorded instrument transferred ownership to Fox Hollow?" Denise glanced at her attorney. "The plat establishes the access." Claire nodded. "I did not ask whether the plat shows access. I asked what recorded instrument transferred ownership." The room changed. You could feel it before anyone spoke. The heating vent clicked on above us, and suddenly that little mechanical sound seemed loud. Denise shifted in her chair. "The association has exercised control for decades." Claire reached into the folder and placed the certified deed on the table. Then Martin Cole's survey. Then the chain of title summary. 1 page at a time. No theatrics. "The recorded documents show the Avery parcel continuing beneath the bridge approach," Claire said. "They also show a 12-foot non-exclusive easement for ingress and egress benefiting specified parcels in the original subdivision." Denise's attorney picked up the deed and read silently. His expression changed first. Not dramatically, just a small tightening around the mouth. Claire continued. "The easement grants access rights. It does not convey fee title to the association. It does not identify Blue Ember's tract as a benefited parcel. And nothing we located authorizes the board to license expanded construction access to outside land." Denise interrupted. "People have used that crossing for 30 years. Claire looked directly at her. "No one is disputing that." That answer hit harder than an argument would have, because Denise had spent weeks telling everyone I wanted to shut residents out. Claire had just removed that defense completely. "Mr. Avery has continued honoring existing residential access throughout this dispute," she said. "The question is not whether Fox Hollow residents may cross. The question is whether this association owns the bridge and may sell broader use to a third party." The Blue Ember agreement appeared on the screen next. There was Denise's signature beneath the representation of full ownership. Then Claire placed the certified deed beside it under the document camera. 2 pieces of paper. 2 completely different stories. I watched Denise stare at them. For the first time since this began, she stopped looking at me and started looking at her own attorney. He asked for a short recess. We stepped into the hallway. The air smelled like floor wax and stale coffee. I stood beside a vending machine while Claire reviewed her notes. "Do we have them?" I asked quietly. "We have the record," she said. "Now we see what they do with it." 10 minutes later, the association attorney returned without Denise's confident smile beside him. He said Fox Hollow was prepared to suspend all Blue Ember access activity, pending formal resolution of title and easement scope. Claire did not smile. Neither did I. Because the biggest mistake Denise had made was not misunderstanding an old map. It was signing a new contract based on a power the old records never gave her. The suspension lasted 48 hours before the rest of the problem surfaced. Blue Ember's project manager called Claire Tuesday afternoon, not me. By then, their company had reviewed the same documents we had put on the conference table, and they were asking a very different question from Denise. They did not ask whether residents had crossed the bridge for years. They asked whether Fox Hollow had ever possessed the legal authority to sell them access in the first place. Claire kept the conversation professional. No accusations. No threats. She simply confirmed that I had never signed an access agreement with Blue Ember and had never authorized commercial construction traffic across the Avery parcel. That was enough. By Wednesday morning, every portable barrier and piece of staging equipment Blue Ember had placed near the crossing was gone. The orange survey ribbons remained in the woods, fluttering in the wind like evidence nobody wanted to claim. Denise did not disappear quietly. She sent a neighborhood email saying the project had been temporarily delayed by an unresolved private claim. Helen forwarded it to me with 3 words typed above the message. She is still spinning. I almost responded. Claire told me not to. Let the documents do the work. That afternoon, Fox Hollow's attorney sent a formal proposal. The association would withdraw the $2,500 assessment against me, suspend its claim of ownership, and remove the new access controls while the parties worked toward a recorded clarification of the easement. In exchange, they wanted everyone to release claims related to the dispute. Claire read the draft twice, then shook her head. They are trying to settle the bridge and bury the contract problem in the same paragraph. She redlined it. Ownership acknowledgement had to be explicit. Existing easement rights had to remain protected. No third-party expansion without separate lawful authority. Any association equipment installed on my parcel had to be removed. And the release could not erase whatever obligations Fox Hollow had created with Blue Ember through its own representations. The revised document went back. Silence followed. 2 days. Then 3. During that time, something unexpected happened inside Fox Hollow. Residents began asking for records. Not because I told them to. Because Denise had spent weeks insisting the association owned the bridge, and now nobody could find the document proving it. Helen requested maintenance expenditures. Another homeowner asked for the board vote approving the Blue Ember agreement. Someone else asked why bridge assessments had appeared on past budgets when my receipts showed I had purchased most of the repair materials myself. Claire warned me not to speculate about money. There could be innocent explanations. Accounting categories could be broad. Labor could have been charged elsewhere. I stayed out of it. Ownership was our case. The board's finances belonged to the members. But Denise had created a problem that was no longer limited to me. Friday evening, I drove home through light fog and found 3 Fox Hollow board members standing beside the bridge. Denise was not with them. One of them, a retired schoolteacher named Paul Mercer, held a folder against his chest. "Russell, can we talk?" he asked. We stood near the south railing while water moved softly below us. Paul looked exhausted. "We were told the association had title." I said nothing. He continued. "We approved the access agreement based on that representation." The second board member stared at the new HOA sign bolted into my railing. "We never saw the deed you showed at the hearing." I looked at the 3 of them. "Neither did I until this month." Paul nodded slowly. "There is going to be a special membership meeting." That was the first time I realized Denise might lose more than an argument. Monday night, the Fox Hollow clubhouse was packed. Cars lined both sides of the street. Claire advised me to attend, but not speak unless asked. Denise sat at the front table beneath bright recessed lights, papers stacked neatly before her. Her usual composure had returned, but only on the surface. I could see it in the way she kept aligning the corners of her documents. Paul opened the meeting and read the findings from the title review. The association had no recorded fee ownership of the bridge parcel. The 12-foot easement benefited identified residential parcels. The Blue Ember tract was not one of them. Then he announced that the board had voted to terminate the construction access agreement and accept a settlement framework recognizing the recorded property rights. The room filled with murmurs. Denise reached for the microphone. Paul stopped her gently. "There is one more item." A petition signed by more than half the voting membership requested her removal as president. Denise looked toward me for the first time that night. I did not smile. I did not need to. Behind her, projected on the clubhouse wall, was the one thing she had spent weeks pretending did not matter, the recorded deed. The vote took less than 20 minutes. Denise Harwood was removed as president by a margin wide enough that nobody asked for a recount. She sat perfectly still while Paul Mercer read the result, one hand resting on the same polished clipboard she had carried to my bridge weeks earlier. For once, she had no speech prepared that could change what the room had already decided. The association accepted the settlement framework 3 days later. The recorded agreement recognized the Avery parcel ownership, preserved the 12-foot residential easement exactly as written, and prohibited Fox Hollow from granting new third-party access beyond the rights contained in the existing instruments. My $2,500 assessment disappeared. The association agreed to remove the camera, access hardware, reflective markers, and the aluminum sign it had installed without my permission. Blue Ember formally terminated its construction access arrangement and returned to the longer route around the ridge while it worked through its own permitting and access options. Nobody lost the right to reach their home. Nobody was trapped behind a gate. The families who had crossed that bridge for decades kept crossing it the same way they always had. That mattered to me more than making Denise uncomfortable. A week later, I stood beside the south railing while a maintenance crew backed out the screws holding the Fox Hollow sign. The drill whined, metal shavings curled away from the holes, and then the sign came free. The bare rectangle beneath it was lighter than the surrounding wood. I ran my thumb across one of the empty screw holes and remembered the morning I had first found Denise standing there, telling me I needed permission to park on association property. It already felt like something that had happened years ago. Helen walked across carrying a grocery bag in one hand. She stopped beside me and looked at the empty railing. "So what happens now?" she asked. "You putting up a gate?" I smiled. "No gate." She seemed relieved, even though I had told her that answer more than once. "Then what are you putting there?" I showed her the small bronze plaque I had ordered from a local engraver. It was simple. Avery Bridge. Private property. Recorded access rights honored. Helen read it twice. "That sounds like your father." I looked at her. "You never met him?" "No," she said. "But I think I understand him now." That afternoon, I mounted the plaque myself. No oversized lettering. No warnings. No threats. Just the truth, fastened to the same railing Dad had repaired year after year. When I finished, I walked to the eastern approach and found the old square-headed nail near the timber. I tapped it twice. The sound was small against the creak. 12 feet, Russ. That is the promise. For most of my life, I thought Dad had been talking about lumber and measurements. He had actually been teaching me something harder. Respect what belongs to other people. Protect what belongs to you. And never confuse generosity with surrender. Fox Hollow had a right to cross where the deed said it could cross. That right survived every argument. But Denise had taken decades of neighborly access and treated it like ownership. Then she tried to sell something larger than the promise itself. That was where everything broke. A few months later, Paul told me the new board had changed how it handled property records. Any agreement involving land, easements, or outside developers now required an independent title review before a vote. Residents could see the supporting documents instead of relying on summaries from one officer. I liked that outcome almost as much as getting my bridge back. Justice should fix more than the person who caused the problem. It should make the next problem harder to create. The following spring, I replaced 2 warped deck boards near the center span. Morning fog hung low over Morrow Creek, and the smell of fresh-cut oak mixed with cold water rising through the gaps. Cars passed slowly while I worked. Helen waved. Paul waved. Nobody asked my permission to use rights they already had. Nobody claimed rights they did not. When I tightened the final bolt, I looked at that bronze plaque glowing in the morning light and understood why the whole fight had ended the way it did. Denise had believed authority came from signs, meetings, votes, and confidence. My father knew better. Sometimes authority is quieter than that. Sometimes it sits untouched in a county record book for decades, waiting for somebody to finally read the line that matters. Justice was never about closing the bridge. It was about closing the distance between what the homeowners association said it owned and what the deed proved it never did.